An elephant walks past a watering hole she hasn't visited in over 30 years. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't wander. She walks directly to the exact spot where the water used to be, even though the landscape around it has completely changed. Nobody showed her the way. She just remembered. Elephants never forget sounds like the kind of phrase that got exaggerated somewhere along the way. The sort of thing that starts as folklore and ends up printed on coffee mugs. Except in this case, the science backs it up far more than you'd expect.
So, what does an elephant's memory actually do, and why does it matter so much to how they survive? Let's start with the basics. Elephants have the largest brains of any land animal, and a disproportionately large portion of that brain is dedicated to the hippocampus, the region most associated with memory formation in mammals. In humans, the hippocampus helps us remember where we parked the car or what we did last weekend. In elephants, that same structure appears to be doing something far more expansive, storing detailed spatial maps, social relationships, and specific individual identities that can last for decades.
This memory isn't just a fun biological quirk. It's a survival tool. And it's most obvious in the role of the matriarch, the oldest and typically most experienced female who leads an elephant herd. During a severe drought in Tanzania, researchers found that herds led by older matriarchs were significantly more likely to survive than herds led by younger ones. The reason wasn't strength or speed, it was memory. The older matriarchs remembered distant water sources from droughts that happened decades earlier, sources most of the herd had never personally visited. In other words, an elephant herd survival can depend on an experience one single animal had 30 or 40 years earlier. That memory effectively gets passed down, not through genetics, but through leadership.
The matriarch becomes a living map, carrying information that would otherwise be lost the moment the animals who originally learned it died. This is memory functioning less like a personal diary and more like an inherited emergency plan, one that only works because a single elephant kept the details intact for decades. This kind of knowledge doesn't stay locked inside a single elephant's mind either. Younger elephants spend decades observing the matriarch's decisions, watching where she leads the herd during hard seasons, memorizing her patterns the same way a person might absorb a skill from a mentor. By the time a young female is old enough to potentially lead her own herd someday, she's already absorbed years of observed decision-making, effectively inheriting a memory she never personally experienced firsthand. Elephants also apply this same long-term memory to relationships.
Studies have shown elephants can recognize and remember the voices, scents, and even the specific calls of other elephants they haven't encountered in years. When researchers played recorded calls from long-separated family members, elephants reacted with clear recognition, sometimes rushing toward the sound, even after prolonged periods of separation. They're not just remembering that another elephant exists somewhere, they're remembering a specific individual and treating that memory as socially meaningful. This social memory extends to threats as well, and one of the more startling examples involves humans.
Researchers studying elephants in parts of Africa found that herds reacted with significantly more fear and defensive behavior toward the scent and clothing associated with specific ethnic groups historically involved in elephant hunting compared to groups with no such history. The elephants weren't reacting to individual people they'd personally encountered before. They appeared to be responding to patterns passed down and reinforced across the herd, a kind of collective threat memory built from repeated experience over generations. Perhaps the most striking evidence of elephant memory involves how they respond to death. Elephants have been observed returning to the bones of deceased herd members, sometimes years after the death occurred, gently touching the skull and tusks with their trunks in a manner researchers describe as investigative, even ritualistic. They appeared to distinguish elephant remains from other bones entirely, showing little interest in the skeletons of other species, while lingering meaningfully at the remains of their own kind.
Whatever is happening in those moments, it strongly suggests they remember not just that an individual existed, but who that individual specifically was.
Some researchers have even observed elephants covering the remains of dead companions with leaves and branches, a behavior with no clear survival purpose beyond whatever internal significance it holds for the animal performing it. So why would evolution build a memory system this powerful? The answer connects directly to how elephants live. Their environments change dramatically across seasons and years. Droughts, floods, shifting food availability, and a poor decision about where to search for water can be fatal for an entire herd. Long, detailed memory isn't a luxury for an animal like this. It's practically a requirement. An elephant that forgets where water was during the last major drought may not survive the next one. This is where the phrase, "elephants never forget," gets more accurate, but also more specific than most people realize. It's not that an elephant remembers everything indiscriminately.
It's that their memory system appears finely tuned to retain exactly the kinds of information that matter most for survival: locations, danger, and relationships. Trivial or repetitive information likely fades the way it does in most animals. What sticks, and sticks for decades, is the information a herd's survival might eventually depend on. There's also a heavier side to this. If elephants can remember specific danger, specific loss, and specific individuals for decades, that also implies they may carry the emotional weight of those memories for a very long time. Researchers have documented behavior in elephants following traumatic events like poaching or culling that resembles long-term stress responses, sometimes appearing altered in behavior for years afterward. A memory system built for survival doesn't necessarily come with an easy way to let painful memories go.
Elephants aren't alone in having unusually long memories, though. Few species push it quite this far. Crows can recognize individual human faces years after a single negative encounter. Dolphins have been shown to remember the signature whistles of other dolphins after being separated for over 20 years, the longest social memory ever recorded outside of humans. But elephants combine that kind of long-term recognition with something rarer, applying it directly to life or death decisions about where an entire herd should go. Some of this may come down to raw biology. An elephant's brain contains roughly 3 times as many neurons as a human brain, though distributed differently, with a significant portion concentrated in areas tied to memory and sensory processing, rather than the kind of abstract reasoning humans rely on. More storage capacity alone doesn't explain behavior, but it does help explain how so much detailed, specific information could remain accessible for so long. Maybe that's the real story behind an elephant standing at an empty watering hole after 30 years. It was never simply about remembering directions. It was about carrying an enormous, detailed internal record of danger, loss, and connection, one built specifically because forgetting, for an animal like this, was never really an option worth risking.